In 1685, Versailles stood as the most magnificent palace Europe had ever seen. 20 years after Louis XIV moved his court here permanently, the palace had become more than a royal residence. It was a statement of power made in marble, gold, and glass. A stage for absolute monarchy where 10,000 souls lived, competed, and performed under the watch of a king who styled himself the Sun King. This was France at its zenith, before revolution, before decline, when one man's vision had transformed a modest hunting lodge into the center of the civilized world. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings and engravings to life, allowing us to shift perspective, change camera angles, and move through Versailles as it appeared in 1685 at the absolute peak of Louis XIV's reign. This is Versailles when it mattered most. Before it became a symbol of absolute power, Versailles was simply a hunting lodge. Louis XV built a modest brick and stone chateau here in the 1620s. Drawn to the area's forests and game, it was unpretentious, almost rustic, a place to escape court formality. But his son, Louis XIV, saw something else. Beginning in 1661, the young king launched a transformation that would consume decades, countless lives, and a staggering portion of France's wealth. By 1685, that transformation was essentially complete. The original hunting lodge had been absorbed into a palace of unprecedented scale. The building stretched nearly 2,000 feet across, its facade a rhythm of classical columns, arched windows, and ornamental sculpture. The central wing faced west toward gardens that extended as far as the eye could see, a landscape of geometric precision carved from wilderness by the vision of André Le Nôtre. Walking through the forecourts, you'd pass through successive gates and courtyards, each more exclusive than the last. The outer court for common visitors and tradesmen, the royal court for those with official business, and finally, the marble court, the heart of the original lodge, now reserved for the highest nobility and foreign ambassadors. Every step inward marked a step up in privilege and proximity to power. Then came the interior, room after room of calculated magnificence. Walls covered in colored marble, ceilings alive with painted mythological scenes glorifying French victories and the king himself. Chandeliers hung heavy with crystal, reflecting candlelight off gilded moldings and mirrors imported at enormous cost. But nothing prepared visitors for the Hall of Mirrors. Completed in 1684, just 1 year before our moment, the Galerie des Glaces stretched 240 feet along the western facade. 17 arched windows overlooked the gardens, and facing them 17 matching arches filled with 357 mirrors. At a time when large mirrors were almost priceless, this gallery represented wealth beyond comprehension. Here, ambassadors waited for audiences. Courtiers paraded during evening entertainments. And Louis himself passed through daily, his image multiplied endlessly in glass. A king reflected infinite times in his own creation. Outside, the gardens stretched across 2,000 acres of manicured nature. Gravel paths led between precisely trimmed hedges, past marble sculptures of Greek and Roman gods, all carefully positioned to catch the light at specific hours. Fountains numbered in the hundreds, their complex hydraulics powered by the Machine de Marly, which lifted water from the Seine through a system of pumps and reservoirs. When all the fountains ran at once, which they could only do for short periods, Versailles consumed more water than the entire city of Paris. The Grand Canal extended more than a mile into the distance, wide enough for gondolas and small sailing vessels. Louis kept a miniature fleet here, including Venetian gondolas complete with gondoliers brought from Italy. Beyond the canal, more gardens, more groves, the orangerie housing 1,200 orange trees in silver boxes, and the menagerie, a royal zoo displaying exotic animals from across the known world. Every sightline had been calculated, every tree planted to purpose. This wasn't nature, it was nature reshaped into an argument for absolute control. By 1685, Louis XIV was 47 years old and had reigned for 42 years, though his personal rule only began in 1661 when he took full control after Cardinal Mazarin's death. At this moment, he stood at the height of his power and prestige. France was the dominant military power in Europe. Its culture set the standard from Madrid to St. Petersburg, and Louis himself had perfected the art of kingship as theater. Everything about his day was ceremony. Nothing was private, nothing was simple. From the moment he woke until he retired, The king's life unfolded as a scripted performance, and the courtiers who surrounded him competed desperately for the smallest role. The lever, the king's morning rising, began around 8. Selected courtiers, granted this honor through careful hierarchy, entered the royal bedchamber in waves. First came his closest family, then princes of the blood, then the highest nobles. Each group entered at a precise moment, witnessed a specific part of the ritual. The pulling back of bed curtains, the presentation of holy water, the dressing, garment by garment, each piece handed to Louis by someone whose family had served this function for generations. To hold the king's shirt, even for a moment, was a privilege men schemed for. These weren't servants in the modern sense. They were dukes, counts, men who commanded estates and armies outside these walls. But here, they competed to perform the most menial tasks, because proximity to the king meant everything. After dressing came prayers, then meetings with ministers, then perhaps a council session in his cabinet. But the true performance happened in public. By midday, Louis processed through the state apartments to the chapel for mass, courtiers lining his path, bowing as he passed. Dinner, the grand couvert, might be taken in semi-public, nobles standing at a respectful distance while the king ate. In the afternoon, he might walk in the gardens, and hundreds would follow at a careful distance, watching where he went, who he spoke to, how long he paused at particular fountains. Every gesture carried meaning. If Louis glanced at you, acknowledged you, spoke even a few words, your status rose. Rivals noted it. Allies congratulated you. If he ignored you, looked past you day after day, you were finished. Men and women spent fortunes on clothing, on jewelry, on maintaining apartments at Versailles, all to remain visible in this ruthless theater of favor and neglect. The coucher, the evening retiring, mirrored the morning's ritual. The same hierarchy, the same careful choreography, everything watched, everything noted. And through it all, Louis played his role with absolute consistency, the sun around which 10,000 lesser lights orbited, never allowed to forget who commanded their universe. Living at Versailles in 1685 meant existing in constant competition within suffocating proximity. At any given moment, the palace housed roughly 5,000 courtiers and nobles, plus another 5,000 or more servants, guards, tradesmen, and officials. Some lived in apartments within the palace proper, a mark of high status. Others crowded into converted attics or lodgings in the surrounding town. Space was precious, comfort rare. Even nobles of ancient lineage might share cramped quarters, tolerating inadequate heating, poor sanitation, and the constant noise of thousands living on top of one another. Yet they stayed because absence meant obscurity, and obscurity meant losing whatever favor or position you'd managed to secure. Daily life revolved entirely around the king's schedule. You rose when he rose. You appeared when and where protocol demanded. You attended levees, councils, chapel services, promenades, evening entertainments. To miss these opportunities was to risk invisibility. So courtiers exhausted themselves maintaining presence, wearing their finest clothes until the fabric wore through, borrowing money to keep up appearances they could no longer afford. The women were as much players as the men. Indeed, in many ways, they played a deeper game. Madame de Maintenon occupied a unique position by 1685. She had been governess to the king's illegitimate children by his previous mistress, Madame de Montespan. Quietly, carefully, she had won Louise's respect, then his affection. By this year, though it wasn't publicly announced, she had become his morganatic wife, married in a secret ceremony that gave her influence, but not the title of queen. Maintenon was intelligent, pious, and discreet, everything Montespan had not been. She encouraged Louise's growing religious severity, supported his increasingly conservative policies, and helped shape the moral tone of a court that had once been notorious for its libertine excess. Her apartments connected directly to the king's through a private passageway. She dined with him privately, advised him on matters of state, and gradually she helped turn Versailles from a place of pleasure into something more austere, more controlled. Yet for all its grandeur, Versailles was also deeply uncomfortable. The palace was drafty, inadequately heated, and despite its hundreds of rooms, woefully short on basic facilities. Chamber pots were emptied out windows. Corridors reeked of urine. Disease spread easily in the crowded conditions, and the king himself suffered from various ailments, tended by physicians whose treatments often did more harm than good. The gap between the visual magnificence and the practical reality was stark. Golden ceilings above, filth below. This was the price of turning an entire nobility into permanent houseguests, all watching each other, all performing, none quite comfortable, but none willing to leave. The year 1685 stands out not just for Versailles reaching its physical completion, but for a decision that would define Louis's reign and haunt France for generations. In October, Louis revoked the Edict of Nantes, ending nearly a century of religious tolerance for French Protestants, the Huguenots. It was the culmination of years of increasing pressure, forced conversions, and dragonnades, where soldiers were quartered in Protestant homes to intimidate families into converting. Now the final blow fell. Protestant worship was banned. Pastors were exiled. Children were required to be raised Catholic. Hundreds of thousands of Huguenots, many of them skilled artisans, merchants, and professionals, fled France for the Netherlands, England, Prussia, and other Protestant states, taking their talents and wealth with them. From Versailles, Louis saw this as necessary, a matter of religious unity and royal authority. One king, one law, one faith. But the economic and cultural cost was staggering. France lost some of its most productive citizens. European opinion, even in Catholic countries, viewed the revocation with alarm. And the Huguenot diaspora spread stories of persecution that damaged France's reputation for decades. Yet at Versailles, surrounded by courtiers who applauded every royal decision, Louis heard only approval. This was the danger of the system he'd created. A bubble of affirmation where dissent was invisible and the king's will became unquestionable reality. But in 1685, those consequences lay ahead. At this moment, Versailles functioned exactly as Louis intended. It was the stage for European diplomacy, where ambassadors came to negotiate treaties, where princes visited to learn statecraft, where culture, fashion, and manners were set for the entire continent. French became the language of international relations. French architecture inspired palaces from Sweden to Spain. French etiquette defined court behavior everywhere. And at the center of it all sat Louis, the Sun King, ruling from a palace that seemed to prove absolute monarchy could create heaven on earth. The machine Louis built at Versailles was breathtaking in its precision. Every ritual, every ceremony, every moment of the king's day reinforced the same message. The king was not simply first among nobles. He was different in kind, set apart by divine right and maintained by a system that made him the center of all meaning and value. Standing here in this moment, it's hard not to feel the weight of what came next. Within 30 years, Louis's wars would exhaust France's treasury. His great-grandson would inherit a kingdom strained to breaking. And a century after this peak, revolution would sweep away everything this palace represented. The king executed, the nobility scattered, Versailles itself looted and abandoned. But in 1685, none of that was visible. What you saw was power made physical, authority made beautiful, control made into art. You saw the most magnificent palace in Europe, gardens that seemed to stretch to infinity, and a king who appeared immortal in his glory. Sometimes I wish I could step back and walk these halls as they were, even just for a single day, to feel the weight of that world, the beauty and the suffocation of it, the glory and the cost. For now, this reconstruction is as close as I can come. Versailles in 1685, the absolute peak, the moment before the long, slow fall began. If there's another palace, another moment in time, or another scene from history you'd like to see brought back to life, let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching.